The day after the funeral, the house felt louder than the crowd ever had. The silence pressed against the walls, thick and uncomfortable, like it was waiting for something to break. Emma Wilson stood in the hallway, still wearing yesterday's sweater, staring at the front door as if someone might knock and explain that everything had been a mistake. That her father would walk back in, shake his head, and laugh about the confusion. But no one came. Everyone had already said their goodbyes and returned to their normal lives. Everyone except one person. Daniel Harper didn't leave when everyone else did. Emma remembered noticing it first when the cars were gone. The street looked empty, almost abandoned. The neighbors had hugged her. Friends had whispered kind words. Relatives had promised to call. And then, one by one, they disappeared. Grief worked fast that way. It cleared rooms quickly. But later that evening, as Emma sat alone at the kitchen table, there was a soft knock at the door. Not loud, not demanding. Just steady, patient. Daniel stood outside holding a paper bag, his coat pulled tight against the cold. He looked older than she remembered, his face worn in a quiet way, like life had been heavy but he carried it anyway. "I brought food," he said. "You probably forgot to eat." Emma stepped aside without speaking. Words felt too big. Daniel didn't try to talk much that night. He set the food on the counter, fixed a loose chair leg without being asked, and asked simple questions that didn't hurt. When he left, he said, "I'll check on you tomorrow." Not a question, a statement. Emma didn't stop him. The next morning, she woke up to the sound of movement in the house and panicked for a second, thinking she was imagining things again. But it was real. Daniel was in the living room, carefully stacking boxes her father had left behind. "I let myself in," he said quickly. "You left the door unlocked. I hope that's okay." She nodded. Somehow it was. Days moved quickly after that. Daniel showed up early, left quietly, and never overstayed. He handled phone calls Emma couldn't bring herself to answer. He helped her organize papers she didn't understand. When she broke down unexpectedly, he didn't rush to fix it. He just sat nearby, steady and calm, like an anchor. Emma tried to tell herself it was normal. Of course he stayed. He had loved her father like a brother. This was loyalty, respect, kindness. But something else was happening. And she felt it in small moments she didn't know what to do with. She noticed how Daniel waited for her to finish speaking, even when she struggled to find words. How he remembered small details, how her dad liked his coffee. Which songs made Emma emotional, which rooms still felt too painful to enter. Daniel moved through the house like someone who understood its history but respected its wounds. One afternoon, while cleaning out the garage, Emma found herself laughing at something Daniel said. The sound surprised her. It felt wrong and good at the same time. Daniel froze for a moment, then smiled softly, like he was relieved to hear it too. "I haven't heard that in a while," he said. Emma's smile faded. "Me neither." That night, alone in her room, Emma felt a strange sense of guilt. How could she laugh when her father was gone? How could the world keep moving? And why did Daniel's presence feel like comfort instead of pain? The weeks passed, fast but heavy. Winter deepened. Snow covered the yard her father used to take such pride in. Daniel shoveled it without asking. Fixed a broken heater. Changed light bulbs. Small acts, but they filled the empty spaces. Emma began to rely on him without meaning to. One evening, they sat in the kitchen long after dinner. The clock ticked loudly. Outside, the wind shook the windows. "Everyone else went back to their lives," Emma said suddenly. "I don't blame them. I just noticed." Daniel looked at his hands. "I didn't know how to leave." The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. "You could," she said gently. "I know," he replied. "I just didn't want you to feel like the last person in a burning building." The words settled deep in her chest. Emma realized then that Daniel wasn't staying out of obligation. He was staying because he chose to. And that choice mattered more than she was ready to admit. She began to see him differently. Not just as her father's friend, but as a man who carried his own quiet loneliness. He spoke once about his divorce, briefly, without bitterness. About how some endings don't explode, they just fade. leaving you standing in the aftermath, unsure what to rebuild. Emma understood that feeling too well. One afternoon, she caught herself watching Daniel from the doorway as he repaired a cabinet hinge. The way his brow creased in concentration, the calm patience in his movements, the steadiness that had slowly wrapped itself around her broken routine. The thought hit her hard and unwanted. She didn't just feel grateful. She felt drawn to him. The realization scared her. She pushed it away, reminding herself who he was, who her father had been, what lines shouldn't be crossed. She focused on practical things: work, errands, keeping busy. But feelings don't disappear just because you ignore them. One night after Daniel left, Emma walked through the house alone. She noticed how much quieter it felt without him. Too quiet. Like something essential had gone missing. She stood in her father's old study and picked up a framed photo of him and Daniel. Young and smiling, arms thrown over each other's shoulders. They looked like men who believed life would always be simple. Emma swallowed hard. "Dad," she whispered into the empty room, "what am I supposed to do with this?" There was no answer. Only the weight of choices she wasn't ready to make. The next morning, Daniel didn't come. Emma told herself not to be disappointed. He had his own life. She shouldn't expect him to orbit her grief forever. Still, the house felt colder, larger. She checked her phone more times than she wanted to admit. Late that afternoon, the doorbell rang. Daniel stood there looking unsure for the first time since the funeral. "I thought maybe you'd want some space," he said, "but I didn't want to disappear without saying anything." Emma felt relief wash over her before she could stop it. "Come in," she said. They sat across from each other, the air thick with things neither knew how to name. Something had shifted. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was awareness. Daniel cleared his throat. "If at any point this feels like too much, tell me. I don't want to confuse things." Emma nodded slowly. "I don't know what I feel yet. I just know. I don't want to be alone right now." Daniel met her eyes. "You don't have to be." The moment stretched, quiet and meaningful. No touching. No promises. Just two people standing at the edge of something uncertain. That night, as Emma went to bed, her heart felt heavy but awake. Grief was still there, deep and sharp. But alongside it was something new, fragile, confusing, and impossible to ignore. Daniel Harper had stayed when everyone else left. And Emma knew, with a mix of fear and hope, that his staying was changing everything. The first warm day of spring hit the town like a promise, melting the last patches of snow and turning the streets shiny and wet. Emma Wilson noticed it the moment she opened her front door. There was sunlight on the porch, faint smell of earth, and for the first time in months, a sense that life might move forward. She stepped outside to clear the walkway and saw Daniel Harper approaching down the street, hands in his pockets, a gentle smile on his face. She felt her heart skip, a small reminder of feelings she hadn't been ready to name. He didn't knock. He didn't need to. He had already become part of the rhythm of her days. "Morning," he said casually, but his voice carried a warmth that made the cold winter seem like a distant memory. Emma waved and stepped aside, letting him in. They didn't speak about grief at first. The air between them was light, filled with ordinary conversation about weather, the neighbors, and the stubborn weeds in the garden. It was simple, grounding, and for Emma, surprisingly comforting. She realized that she had been holding her breath for months, waiting for life to feel normal again. And Daniel's presence made that possible. They began to spend more time together in ways that felt natural, almost inevitable. Walks around the neighborhood became routine, just enough distance from the house to escape memories without running from them. Daniel told stories about his own life years of quiet loneliness. A marriage that had ended without drama but left its mark. Moments of regret and small triumphs. Emma shared pieces of herself cautiously, afraid of moving too fast, but Daniel's patience created a space where it felt safe. There were no rushed words, no pressure. Just understanding. One afternoon, while they sat on the porch with steaming mugs of tea, Daniel broke the silence in a way that made Emma's stomach tighten. "I've been thinking," he said, staring at the yard. "I don't want to cross any lines. I know what's appropriate. I know who I am in your life. But I also can't ignore this feeling that's growing. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The meaning was clear. Emma felt her chest tighten and her mind spin. She had tried to push these thoughts aside, but hearing him voice the unspoken brought clarity and fear in equal measure. I don't even know where the lines are anymore, Emma admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. She wasn't sure if she wanted an answer or just wanted to hear it aloud. The truth of their emotions hung between them, unspoken but undeniable. For the first time, Emma recognized the depth of what had grown quietly over weeks of shared silence, small kindnesses, and mutual grief. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't reckless. It was real. Emma wrestled with guilt. This was her father's friend, a man who had known her for decades, who had shared countless memories with her family. How could she feel drawn to him without betraying her father's memory? Daniel seemed to sense her hesitation. He gave her space without leaving, his quiet presence a reminder that connection didn't need to be forced. The tension between them was a delicate balance of longing and restraint. Days turned into weeks. They continued to meet, sometimes talking, sometimes sitting in silence, enjoying the simple act of being near each other. Emma noticed herself laughing more freely, feeling lighter in ways she hadn't allowed since her father's passing. Daniel noticed too, and the subtle acknowledgement of these changes built a foundation that neither of them could deny. There was an emotional intimacy growing between them that wasn't just about grief, was about understanding, companionship, and the slow, steady rekindling of hope. One evening, Emma found a photograph tucked into an old drawer, a picture of her father and Daniel at a lake, both young, both smiling. On the back, her father's handwriting read, "Family isn't just who you're born with. It's who shows up when it matters." Emma held the photo, her eyes filling with tears, and understood something important. Daniel hadn't stayed out of obligation. He had stayed because he cared, because he was part of her life in a way that mattered deeply. And she, in turn, had started to care too. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. Emma spent the night turning the idea over in her mind. Could she allow herself to feel something beyond grief? Could she let herself hope again? The questions were unrelenting, and by morning, she knew she couldn't avoid them any longer. When she saw Daniel at the door that afternoon, she didn't hesitate. She opened it fully, inviting him in, not just into the house, but into her world. They talked for hours that day about boundaries, fears, and the uncertainty of their feelings. Neither wanted to rush, neither wanted to hide what was growing between them. They discussed honesty, respect, and the slow pace they both needed. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was careful, deliberate, and filled with the quiet intensity of two people navigating emotions that were real, complicated, and unavoidable. Every word, every pause built a bridge over the space left by grief, connecting them in ways that were unexpected, yet undeniable. Emma found herself looking forward to their conversations, to their shared routines, to the small but meaningful gestures Daniel made that showed he was present in her life. Not just in memory of her father. He became a source of stability, a companion in the truest sense. Someone who made the house feel less empty without trying to erase the past. His laughter, his patience, his quiet understanding, all of it began to matter more than she had thought possible. The emotional tension between them grew in subtle ways. A glance that lingered too long. A shared laugh over something minor. A moment of silence that didn't feel uncomfortable but intimate. Emma recognized that these moments were the foundation of a connection that could grow into something deeper if they were patient. And Daniel, she could tell, felt the same. He never pushed, never forced, never crossed lines. But his presence was a constant reminder that life could still hold warmth, affection, and the possibility of love even after profound loss. One afternoon, as they walked through the neighborhood, Emma felt a rush of courage. "I don't want to replace anyone," she admitted, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. Daniel looked at her, his expression soft and sincere. "Neither do I," he said quietly. "I just don't want to pretend this doesn't exist." That acknowledgement changed something. It named their feelings without pressuring them. It gave them permission to explore, to care, to hope, while still honoring the past. From that moment, the relationship deepened, naturally and without fanfare. They continued to share walks, meals, and quiet evenings. They laughed more freely, shared memories of Emma's father, and slowly, cautiously allowed themselves to imagine a future that included each other. The boundaries they had discussed remained, but within them, a new closeness flourished, a companionship built on respect, shared grief, and the quiet understanding that some connections are meant to be nurtured slowly, thoughtfully, and sincerely. Emma began to feel life returning to her in unexpected ways. Her home felt alive again, filled with the warmth of shared moments. Her heart, which had felt heavy and locked for months, began to open, cautiously but undeniably. Daniel's steady presence reminded her that grief didn't have to define every day, that hope could exist alongside loss, and that love didn't have to be sudden or reckless to be real. The weeks passed, filled with small gestures that spoke volumes. Daniel fixed the leaking faucet, brought her coffee in the morning, remembered small details about her life. Each act, ordinary in appearance, carried a deeper meaning, a promise of care, a recognition of her worth, and an unspoken question: would she let him in completely? Emma wrestled with that question privately, knowing that feelings weren't simple, especially ones entwined with memory loss and gratitude. But slowly, quietly, she realized that she had already let him in ways too deep to ignore. The affection, respect, and growing attraction were undeniable. She no longer felt guilty for noticing it. She no longer tried to suppress the flutter in her chest when he smiled. She simply allowed herself to feel, one day at a time. Finally, one evening, as the sun set over the neighborhood, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Emma and Daniel sat on the porch steps. The silence between them was comfortable, not awkward. Daniel spoke first. "I know we're being careful. I know we have to be. But I don't want to pretend this doesn't exist. I don't want to ignore what's real." Emma looked at him, her eyes reflecting the fading light, and nodded. "Neither do I." No words were needed beyond that. The moment was enough. The acknowledgement, the consent to explore carefully, was everything. They agreed to move slowly. No promises, no pressure, just honesty, presence, and patience. They would take time to understand their feelings, to navigate the new territory between them, and to allow something gentle to grow naturally. It wasn't dramatic or rushed. It was careful, deliberate, and filled with hope. That night, Emma walked through her home, feeling a lightness she hadn't known for months. She knew that grief was still part of her life. She knew that loss had changed her. But she also knew that love, connection, and hope were possible again. And for the first time since the day everyone else had left, she realized that the person who stayed wasn't there to replace the past. He was there to help her step into a future she hadn't dared to imagine, a future that might finally include happiness, warmth, and the quiet, enduring presence of someone who truly cared.